Today, I'm going to take you through some post-exploitation techniques that we often do here at LMG when we're able to compromise a big IP F5 load balancer. You know, big IP is a product put out by F5 that often does things in your network. It's called an ADC, where it'll be a load balancer or do other functions in your network, and it's kind of given a privileged location in your network to that front end's other services. In recent years, there have been several high-profile vulnerabilities found in the big IP software that you need to patch right away when these vulnerabilities are found. And I'm going to demonstrate a vulnerability that was discovered and released back in October of 2023. So I've set up and created here in my lab environment a vulnerable big IP load balancer. And you can see here, this is the management interface. So this is the web interface that shouldn't be on the internet. We've reported in the past how we've found, anywhere from 20 to 40,000 of these on the internet. They shouldn't be there, but sometimes they are. And then if they're on the inside of your network where they belong, they should be limited to only the individuals that need access to it. And let me show you why. So with this machine, you'll see the IP address of it. It's set up in my lab. So we've got a IP of 192.168.122.37. We'll go ahead and exploit this machine and gain root level access to the machine. We're using a publicly available exploit put out by Wolf Hacker. He's a very talented individual. Basically, this is a vulnerability where it's doing request smuggling, where it's actually doing a request inside of a request and able to convince the back end of the F5 to create a new user account. And so that's what we've done here is it created this user account with this password, and now we have a remote shell on this host. And so, once we've compromised a host and we've got, we can ask, who am I? Or root. And once we're root on this box, what can we do? And this is where, a lot of people, need to make that connection between, okay, so you've got access to this box, now what? And let me show you how this can actually be pretty devastating for your organization, depending on how you've got it configured. And I'll show you a way that a lot of organizations have it configured today. So once we're on the box, what can we do? We can do, the typical, so this is actually a Linux machine, right? So it's just like most Linux machines out there in a lot of ways. And so it has files like etc shadow, and here you'll see that we've got things like password hashes that we could go crack, including for root and admin, as well as even the user account that was just created. And so we actually know what this password is. And what a password hash is basically it's a one-way function where if you have the password, you can turn it into a hash that you can't reverse back into a password. This is really important because there's several different types of ways that passwords are stored on the big IP. One is these one-way, I think the $6 hash is actually a SHA-512. You could actually take this, put it into a password cracker, and figure out what the original password was by guessing millions and millions of passwords until you come up with the same hash that is stored on the box. And when you do that, then you figured out what the clear text password is. There's another command to show you all these password hashes using their built-in functions, tmsh list auth, where that'll basically give you kind of a prettier view of the same thing here. So you can see all these encrypted passwords. They're not actually encrypted, they're actually hashed. So that's the distinction here. But you can take these and you can put them in a password cracker and crack them. So other things that you can do while you're on the box, you could create a new user here. So if I wanted to, right now I don't actually have an interactive shell on the box. I actually have what's kind of a web shell where basically every command I'm running, it's making a call out to the server saying, hey, go run this command for me and give me the results. If we want, we can actually create our own user account. So we can create an LMG admin account with a very secure password. And if you run this command, then you're actually going to create your own user account on the platform. It looks like I already created it earlier, but you create your own user account on the platform, then you could secure shell in as that user. Let me show you. So what I like to do is it's a little known trick that a lot of people have kind of figured this out, but by default, there's what's called an SSH identity key and public key file that's pre-authorized on the F5. So if you look in /root/.ssh, which is a directory on the machine, you'll see that there's some symbolic links for authorized keys, identity pub, and known hosts. And what these are basically, the identity is a private key that when you show up to the server with a private key and they trust the public key in the authorized keys files, it'll let you in. And what you can see here is that the identity and the identity pub go together, right? So this is the private that you want to keep private. This is the public version that you want to put on the authorized keys. And you'll see if we cat out both the authorized keys file and the public key, you'll see there actually that this identity has been authorized as root on the box. So if we take and we cat out the identity file itself, we can actually have a key that without a password will let us straight into the box. So if we go cat that root identity file, we have a private key. And if we take this private key and we'll go ahead and we can exit this tool now, and we get this into identity, we'll paste that in there. We have to change the permissions to be a little more restrictive, otherwise Secure Shell will complain at us and not use it. But now, if we Secure Shell to our host as root using that identity file, it will let us in as root on that host. So who am I? I'm root. I can do the same stuff that I was just doing, but now I'm in an interactive shell. And so if you can get any kind of remote code execution in a management interface on a Big 5 IP, my first go-to move is go grab that identity file, because then you can secure shell in, not even knowing a password. And now I've got full local access on this box, right? I can look at processes, I can look at interfaces, I can do all sorts of fun stuff on the box. One of the things that I want to do is I want to get passwords. So often the Big IP has got access to other resources on your network. And its main configuration file is this bigip.conf. And so if we cat that, you'll see that you've got all sorts of configuration components, things that have been configured on the host. And this is where the other kind of passwords that are stored on the box are kept. In particular, reversible passwords. So you see here, there's LDAP authentication, where it looks like we've got a user account, Tony Stark, and that user account's password is stored in the bind password field. And this can't be a one-way hash, because we have to have this be able to take this password in clear text in order to log into the domain controller. So the Big IP has got ways to decrypt this password. This is called reversible encryption. And so we have to be able to decrypt this password, or the box needs to decrypt this password so it can log into the service. And I spent a couple days with Ghidra digging through this firmware, and I figured it out, and it took quite an effort. But let me explain to you, and I'll start. There's actually I came up with several different ways that I can get at the clear text version of the password. And I'm going to start with the hardest. And so basically, there's three files other than, or two other files other than this Big IP conf. There's a config Big IP KStore master file. And then there's also, in that same directory, there's a hidden file, because it has the file name starts with a dot. And that is config Big IP KStore .unit key. And you'll see here, these are both pretty small files. The master key is actually This is the main key that can decrypt the passwords in that file, but it can't decrypt it on its own. It's actually an encrypted version of the key that can do the decryption. And that key is encrypted with the unit key. And if you see here, the unit key is a 64 byte file. And I can tell you, Big IP, if you know much about it, it actually, you can rotate your unit keys or your master keys, and it'll actually keep two different versions. It's got your current key as well as your previous known key. And the unit key does the same thing. So it keeps the previous known key in the unit key file. And so it actually keeps both of them in there. And what we can do is we can cut out the bytes from that unit key and actually gain access to the unencrypted version of the master key. And actually, I've created a one-liner script. This is a thing of beauty. So basically what I'm doing is, and you saw all those passwords that we can decrypt, they start with $M$, right? And so if we look here, $M$ in the Big IP conf, we're going to go grab all those passwords out, and we're going to basically grab those, and then we're going to take the master key and part of the unit key file, and we're going to decrypt those, and then we're going to take those and we're going to decrypt those $M$ entries directly. And so this little one-liner script, we'll provide it later, but if you are on box with this, you run this and it will literally decrypt all the passwords. And you can see here's Tony Stark's password, I am Iron Man. And this is a surefire way that if you've got those three files or access to those three files, so if you were able to download them, if you're not on box, you can do this off box, or if you're on box, you can just do it, run this command verbatim, and you will decrypt all the $M$ reversible passwords right on the box. So there's another tool on the box called LSSA. So it's actually in user sbin LSSA. And what this tool does is it will go through all of your configuration files and figure out, do I have the master key on the box that can decrypt those passwords? And so it'll actually read all those configs and say, oh, I found an encrypted attribute on different lines, and say, yep, I was able to successfully decrypt them with the current master key. So it basically went through all your config files and said, yep, I've got the key. And it's funny because the tool, so I found the man page for this tool and on Big IP's site. And so it basically says when you run this tool, it looks through the files and then it returns the lines that match the expressions of the keys, but it can't actually be decrypted by the master key. This is actually kind of a bold-faced lie. Let me show you why. This is kind of funny. So what I did because I'm like, hey, this thing's clearly read these passwords and is able to decrypt it in order to know that it works. And so what I did was I copied user sbin LSSA, and I'll copy that into temp, and I'll call it like LMG, right? Don't call it LSSA, because if you read the utility, it actually creates a temp LSSA file, and you'll have all sorts of problems. But just copy it into something else. I'm going to call it LMG. And then if I edit that file in temp LMG, this is the program that basically reads the configurations. And if you look for the word plain, you'll see here that it does a decrypt for each key, and it puts it in a variable called plain. So it clearly it's decrypting it. It's putting in a variable called plain. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit the next line. This is a PHP script, so I'm just going to insert the output of plain, and then I'll put in the carriage return. And then now when we run our version of LSSA, so we run temp LMG now, it's going to be our modified version of LSSA. And guess what it's going to do? It's going to outpop the plain text version of those passwords that were in the config file. So that's way number 2 that we can decrypt these passwords. And then my third way that I like to decrypt the passwords. It's actually, this is kind of genius. It's a lot easier than if you're on Box and you can run whatever commands you want. This is an easier way to decrypt these passwords. And so if you do a caller utility F5 MKU dash capital K and you base 64, decode that and run it into hex pretty print, you'll actually, this is the key that we're coming up with. This is the private key that's decrypted. And so this is kind of the master key that we need in order to decrypt the password. And so let's go ahead and grep out our passwords out of that big IP config. So let's go ahead and let me break down for you what all the different pieces and parts are of that config, because this is important when we actually manually do the decryption with this. And so the $M$ basically specifies that this is their reversible encryption format. And then between the second $sign and the third $sign, you'll see 2 characters. In this particular case, for the bind password, the characters are P4. And what that is that's a salt that's prepended to the password before it's encrypted. And the reason why they do that is so that, one of the reasons is that it makes the hash unique, right? So if that same password is encrypted with a different salt, you're going to get a completely different hash. The other reason why they do it is because when you decrypt it, the first 2 characters of the password should be P4. And that's not actually the password, it's an additive to the password. So basically, if they do a decryption with a key and they see P4 at the beginning, then likely you've successfully decrypted the rest of the password. And so what we can do here is we can echo basically everything after that last $sign to the end, right? So we'll go ahead and take that and we're going to pipe that into OpenSSL. And it's their encryption format is AES 128 ECB, which I think they could have chosen a stronger standard, but that's what they've chosen. And then we'll pass it that key. So you'll see it outputs that P4, and then you'll see that there's the rest of the password right there. I am Iron Man 1969. And so that's the last way. So then basically you can do that, and then you've got a solid decryption because that P4 matches the P4 salt. So basically they just append that to the beginning of your password, encrypt it with the key, so then when you decrypt it with that same key, it should start with that same P4. And that's it. Basically, this is not an exhaustive list of things that you can do post-exploitation. These are definitely some of the ones that have been very successful for us because in this particular case, the LDAP user credential that's connected, actually many of the credentials that Big IP tells you they need to be domain, if you're talking to a domain, it needs to be a domain administrator account. In the LDAP lookup case in particular, they'll tell you on the man page, yeah, it needs to be a domain, or it needs to be an administrative account. And then they don't tell you exactly what administrative functions it needs. So often when administrators are setting this up, they're using domain administrator accounts. So this is definitely a high value target. If I was to go take this username and password for Tony Stark, go hit the domain controller, I'm now a domain admin. And actually we can do that. Why don't we do that? So if we go grab that, so here we are. This is our LDAP setup. So we know that Tony Stark's the username. We know that I am Iron Man is the password. And if we log out of this machine and we use, do I have NXC in the box? I do. So if we use NXC SMB, we go talk to that domain controller that was in the configuration, and then we use the user credential for Tony Stark. And we'll see that we have now pwned the domain. So we can do things like dump the NTDS of the host, which will be everyone's passwords on the box. So there we go. we've now completely compromised the domain, and we have everyone's NTLM hashes, which we could very easily turn into the passwords on our password cracker if they're weak enough. So that's it. That's what I wanted to show you, post-exploitation, and why these private keys that are stored on the box, they need to do a little bit better job at securing them, so that any user that comes along, if I can get root access on the machine, I can now fully compromise not just that machine, but potentially other machines on your entire network. Thank you so much. Have a great day.